You're listening to the Wrigleyville Nation podcast. Season ticket holders and lifelong fans with neighborhood ties discuss Cubs news and neighborhood happenings. Here's your hosts, Jeremy and Pat.
Hello and welcome to the Wrigleyville Nation podcast. This is episode 346 of the podcast. My name is Jeremy Deemer and I'll be your host. I'm joined as always by my co-host. He's my cousin and he's high atop Wrigleyville tonight. How's it going, Pat?
It's going well, Jeremy. Thanks.
I look forward to hearing about all the live baseball you got to see this week, Pat. We're going to get into all of the action of the week that was. We're going to talk about the Cubs news. We've got transactions, we've got complaints, grievances, and all the like. Not a ton of positive stuff, but we will talk about the troubles. We will talk about Shota Imanaga and how much we love him. So it's going to be, we got a lot to cover. And to help us unpack all of the news of the week, look ahead and preview the games coming up. You know him from his work at Locked On Cubs podcast. Matt Cozzi, thanks for taking time out to talk Cubs with us tonight.
Jeremy and Pat, pleased to be on Wrigleyville Nation. I respect all the Cubs podcasts that have come before me. It was enjoyable to even just talk with you guys before we press record. And, I do listen to all the Cubs shows, big and small, and for better or worse. And I really am excited to be on. I am familiar with the show and the model. Obviously very guest heavy. And so for me to be up next is a thrill for me.
Well, we're glad to have you here, and a tip of the cap, and we're impressed as we are a weekly podcast. But for those folks who do the grind every day, you get a special admiration for us for being able to do that. So very impressed that you can do that. Yeah,
we'll see how sustainable it is, but for now, after every game, it really is a grind covering a baseball team. I've had conversations like recently with people in the industry and my wife and things like that. And, it's just been on my heart and mind a lot lately. It's what makes baseball really unique. Because if I was hosting Locked On Bears, like, it wouldn't even be a topic. But yeah, recording every night is a beast.
Well, and you're sort of the new beat writers of the modern era, right? Whereas we used to have beat writers who people would read in these things called newspapers that you would buy or have delivered to your homes. Now, I think podcasts have kind of taken over that realm, and so you're the new beat writer. I think what makes it, well, and you can speak for this, but what I would think would make it more challenging on a podcast is, unlike a writer who has a few minutes to kind of put things on paper and has an editor to smooth things out, I'm sure the heat of the moment can be very exhilarating and also very depressing, because the ups and downs of individual games probably lead to these odd outcomes of desperation and or glee.
Yeah, I think there is an adrenaline rush when prepping for the show because, as Sam and I have grown together as a podcast duo and learning more and more like how to do this and how to do it with such a large content output of being a 5 days a week show. I do think there is some lessons learned along the way, and realizing that, the baseball season really is a journey. But at the same time, like going back to Theo and his opening presser, 12, 13 years ago, every game is sacred type thing. But yeah, I'm the point guard of Locked On Cubs and the producer. And so there's been moments where, the game is teeter-totter and I have like 2 thumbnails ready, 2 episode titles, like 2 show outlines. Yeah, it's kind of a bizarre existence sometimes, but it is fun. We're having a good time. I think the listenership that we've generated has bought in. We're trying to pull up the chair to the table, and talk baseball, talk Cubs, and the more and more I think we learn every day, how to do this so often, but it really has been a cool thing. And,
well, for example,
I like the beat writer analogy, Pat, because I think the long-term vision would be, to be the go-to place on a day-to-day basis. Like there's, weekly vehicles or like you guys or the, some other things that happen. But, I do think that as a daily destination, even in a way competing with, as you said, newspapers or Marquee or 670, 1000, I do think that's on the table. I think I have a responsibility. I think the Athletic I've cited triple digit times. So I think I'm thoughtful, about citing the writers, and I have a relationship with Megan Montemurro a little bit. She's a grad of the last high school I taught at, so there's kind of a connection there. We're going to try to have her on soon. So yeah, the dynamics are everywhere.
We want to have her on too. So
Yeah.
when you do
I'll
get her
drop
on,
a
tell
line,
tell her she's got to
Yeah.
be on this show too at some point.
well, I just was thinking, one of the bright spots this week was that the Cubs won not their first, but their second game this year on an instant replay on the final play of the game. So I can only imagine what was going through your head from a podcasting standpoint as you've got Bellinger sliding into home. And they might be out. I don't know. I called them safe. They played Go Cubs Go. What do we do? Like that's going to be an interesting moment.
And the Mets won a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah. With Alonso, right?
Yeah. A big reason for our growth has been going live pretty soon after the 27th out. Because especially the YouTube growth, because people type in Cubs post game or Cubs live, and we make sure to tag it that way. So like we come up. So, but yeah, I think at times like our goal of getting on 10 minutes after the final out is just not realistic because of those situations. So,
well, and frankly, all the large number it feels like this year of exciting wins and heartbreaking losses probably bring people more to a post game because you're not ready to call it a night. Like you want to still keep going because you're either mad or you're extraordinarily happy. It's not like, oh, we lost 7-1, I gave up in the sixth inning kind of thing. Most of these games are very tight.
I think you're right.
Well, let's talk about some of those tight games this week, as we were both wrong in our predictions. We were overly optimistic because the Pirates were on the schedule, so you had a right to be optimistic, but we were proved wrong. As of course, I think we were all fairly certain they would lose 2 out of 3 to Atlanta. I think we were pretty consistent there. We're
hoping not for back-to-back shutouts, but yes, we were. We were not overly optimistic.
Let's park it there for a second. You're right. Back-to-back shutouts. The story, the theme of this week is the offensive struggles. So we've talked about all of the positives being on the pitching side. We've talked about the struggles of the bullpen. And now it's time to talk about the struggles of the offense. And injuries are a problem. No Dansby Swanson, no Nico Horner first part of this stretch. But still we've talked about the struggles at catcher. That's a black hole of offense for us and a defense at times, apparently. So there's a lot of problems on offense. I think that was part of the big story. Let's start with you, Matt. Let's talk a little bit about these struggles here. If the offense is relying on Dansby Swanson and Nico Horner to turn it around, I think we got bigger problems.
Yeah, I think you're right, Jeremy. And the team really so far, about 30% of the way through the season, I think the third poll is Memorial Day. It'll be 33% through the 162. I think the team is just one dimensional. You have excellent starting pitching, and then the line is drawn. And so in a way, as I'm sure we'll get to throughout the episode, there is the side of the coin of like the banking wins argument. And the fact that they have 26 W's next to their name, I think does say something and will prove to be important down the line. But the offense is just ice cold. And sure, Horner and Swanson don't help to have in there. But I do think the harsh reality is you're starting to point out there is even with those dudes back in, and hopefully as soon as Tuesday night, we're starting to see signs of just confirmation of what this team really could be. And I still think they could be good, maybe even bordering really good, but the offense is just elite is not in the vocabulary. I mean, it's not even close. And the reason for their struggles lately, I think really has been the lack of the big hit. There's no power. Everybody's cold at the same time. I mean, it'd be one thing if Bush and Morrell were cold, because we expected that. But then everybody else is, besides Talkman, Bellinger, a glimpse here, Suzuki, a glimpse there. I didn't have the catchers hitting like pitchers on the bingo card.
Brutal. It's brutal.
Like hitting like really bad American League pitchers back in the day. I mean, not just like the Cubs had pitchers who could hit. Like, I mean,
yes,
Arrieta and Mark
Big
Pryor
Z.
and Kerry Wood would be shaking their, and Zabron would be shaking their heads at the way the Cubs catchers are hitting. They'd say, come on, have some pride.
I'm backdating this offensive slide to Saturday, April 27th. The night before they got that really nice win against the Red Sox. And since the 27th, they've been dreadful. They've averaged about 3 runs a game.
That was the 17-0 loss for those of you masochists at home.
Football score.
Yeah.
So combined with absences and poor performance, I've had some almost like, what do you expect moments the last few days? Like, what do you expect? They did have that one game, guys, about 10 days ago at PNC against Jared Jones. I thought that could be a turnaround point, and guess what? It wasn't. They've remained cold. I don't anticipate like a turnaround the next 3 days. Do you? Against Braves pitching?
Negative.
So they're really going to have to squeak these out. There is some softer parts of the schedule coming up. St. Louis this weekend, maybe, but that's 3 night games. All 3 are national TV, if you're into that sort of thing. Then you have Milwaukee. Then after that, it does soften up, but that's still like almost 2 weeks away. So I really think the theme of the season, guys, has been survival.
So just to recap, the catchers are automatic outs, basically.
Yeah, I talked too much there, I think.
We're hoping
this is the place and the time for that.
Right.
We're hoping Dansby Swanson can come back and improve to being a league average hitter, which he was not prior to his injury. We hope Nico Horner can come back and hit a bunch of singles and steal a couple bases to help table set, but certainly not probably to drive in a lot of runs. Meanwhile, Ian Happ doesn't seem like he can hit the ball, hard at all these days. He's really struggled. And even Seiya Suzuki, since he came back from the injury, he's hit the ball hard at times, but he hasn't gotten a lot of hits. Let's put it that way. He's gotten colder as the days have progressed. Meanwhile, today, the Cubs sent Pete Crow-Armstrong back to AAA because they have to make room for Swanson. Interestingly, in doing that, they sent a guy to AAA who has an OPS plus of 87, so a below league average hitter, but who somehow in fewer than 65 at-bats has the second highest WAR among position players on the team, in large part because of his defense. But still, that says a lot when you're sending your second best player, position player, and that's second best in a cumulative status for a guy who's only been in 23 games total and hasn't even started that many, back to the minors. So they're really, like you said, they have to hope Bellinger, can show more than a glimpse. Bush and Morrell, feel like sometimes they, when they're hot, they seem so good.
Mm-hmm.
When they get cold, you're like, oh. holes in their swing, and
we know we got to ride this out with Christopher Morel. We
yeah,
know how this movie goes.
That's his history, right? That's what I was told about him by a Cubs personnel. When he had that first hot streak and they first brought him up, I said, "What about this Morel guy? I mean, they were expecting him to be this good." He's like, "He's very streaky. Be careful," and that's been proven time and time again to be the case. And before the season, we talked about how the Cubs needed to acquire 2 big impact bats. Well, one of those bats ended up being Bellinger, who's the bat we lost. So it's sort of like, okay, well, there's one. And what we really needed was one more big bat through some kind of trade or free agent acquisition or something. And, they didn't do that. They didn't get a Juan Soto type. And I understand why, but they didn't do it, right? I think Michael Busch was the only real offensive addition to the team. And boy, this is not a team, like you said, Matt, in particular, not a team that hits for a lot of power. And this is a tough era of baseball to string together a lot of base hits night after night and be successful. You're more likely to get 2 hit, which the Cubs have been several times this year, or 3 hit. They were 2 hit yesterday, I think, right? And so it's going to be a challenge. I mean, hitting is down across the league, so you have to look at it in perspective, but the Cubs just look dead in the water so often on offense, and that's concerning. And then, I guess the third rail here, great starting pitching, really cold hitting, is that whenever we get late in the game, it's always roll the dice to see whether they can close it out or not. And that's been a frustration. But overall, I'd say you take the 2 games the Cubs won on instant replays on the last play of the game. If those calls go against the Cubs, which I would imagine in any year where we were going to succeed, they would have. Like if we had a good team, a really good team, those would have gone against us for sure.
Always.
The Cubs would be 500 right now instead of 4 games over. Wow. I mean, it's that narrow. So we hope that they pull out of this tailspin, but they do have a lot of things that have to get better in order to do it. And it doesn't seem like internally they have a lot of options right now. When you have Nick Madrigal and Miles Mastrobuoni getting as many at-bats as they've gotten, and I realize we've had injuries, but still, when they're getting as many bats as they do, it makes you wonder, like, how much depth do we have on this team? And that's also a function of the general manager, is making sure that you have good depth, and it seems as if their depth is lacking.
PCA and Mastrobuoni both sent down today. Dansby Swanson is back up, so he's activated, likely to play Tuesday, like you mentioned, Matt. No Luis Vasquez. That was the hot talk, that he would be called up as well. So
I would have taken him over Miles Mastrobuoni. I'll tell you that. Even if he didn't get a single hit, at least he can play shortstop.
So I assume that must mean Nico Horner is ready to go then, if we've got no Luis Vasquez coming up somehow, with all these ups and downs, activations, and sending people to AAA, like you mentioned, Pat. Matt, somehow Madrigal survived. How surprised are you that he's still on this team?
I'm puzzled by these moves. And with Horner actually on the active roster, Jeremy and Pat, I do think another position player needs to be called up. Unless my math is wrong, I'd have to look into that. But I do think someone would have to be called up. If they sent 2 people down, only one was activated. I think Vasquez, there's still a window for him. Unless they pull a big surprise and call it Brennan Davis.
Boy, how great would that be? I mean,
he's really the only other 40-man option. That would be crazy.
I don't know. Yeah, I'm watching what he's doing down in AAA. It's a great story. I mean, he's a guy who has had so many injury problems and was a guy we heard all about for so long.
Yeah.
Then the injury problems. Then you kind of said, "Oh, well, that's a shame. That's too bad. It's never going to work out." And he's just tearing it up right now. And I would love to see that guy get a chance when he's hot. Like, I'm surprised they don't pull the trigger more often on guys that are on a hot streak in AAA and have them come up and try to jumpstart the team.
Even if it was for 10 days or something like that. The Madrigal remaining on the roster surprises me, especially if we find out when the clubhouse opens Tuesday that Vasquez is being added. And then the PCA demotion for an infielder just on the surface is strange. And never mind Pat's breakdown of how he's doing, because that's important too. I didn't see that coming. Madrigal is not a major league player right now, in my opinion.
And when you need a stolen base with a pinch runner, like yesterday in the 9th inning, Pico Armstrong does it, right? When you need
100%.
good defense in the outfield, not just good defense, when you need Andrew Jones level, like Hall of Fame defense in the outfield, Pico Armstrong can do that. Pico Armstrong can actually hit the ball off the wall on the fly if he needs to.
Right.
You know, Nick Madrigal does none of that. He's not fast. He does no glove. He doesn't hit the ball with authority. And it makes you wonder, like, what his purpose is.
He's a backup third baseman
on a team that has like 3 backup third basemen already.
Yeah, right.
I mean, Patrick Wisdom could be a backup third baseman.
He
at
could.
Least he could run into a fastball and hit one out of the park.
That's true. I mean, couldn't Wisdom just be Morel's backup? He's here.
Makes a ton of sense.
Yes.
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 Yeah, I mean, as we're talking the PCA thing, I'm getting a little bit worked up. I have to be real.
Well, the notion, I guess, is that they have too many outfielders, but my goodness, with Happ hitting so poorly.
No, yeah, I don't think so.
And we've seen Suzuki have some defensive struggles like the other night, on Thursday night, sadly. I just think there's a place for Armstrong defensively. And, you know, I've also watched Bush at first base, and I got to say, I'm used to seeing Gold Glove first baseman in Chicago with Derek Lee and Mark Grace and a lot of other guys. I would much rather have Bellinger play some first base late in games and have Pico Armstrong in center field and let Michael Bush be the DH, for God's sake.
I was starting to think about that today on my way home from work. What if they opened a game with PCA or Tauchman in center, Bellinger at first, and then Bush, Tauchman, Wisdom, you know, part of the DH rotation? You know, again, I'm not saying forever, but the next 2-3 days. So we'll see. You know, the one thing about all of this is if Swanson and Horner are really back, that means for the first time since April 14th, the regular lineup is available.
That's right.
And that is big, but you have the 26 people for a reason. You have the 13 position players for a reason. It does seem like PCA was etching a role, not as an everyday player, that brings a lot of value. And actually, it doesn't seem that way because we look at the numbers. It's not seems like it. It was.
With 12 position players currently and 13 pitchers, including Kyle Hendricks, by the way, who who's apparently not starting on Thursday. That's a whole other story. We don't know quite the answer to.
Correct.
But if you told me the Cubs have 12 position players and they had one more to bring up, I'd say, well, keep Armstrong. That's 13. But I would trade Madrigal for Luis Vasquez, frankly. If you're going to have a backup infielder, have him be good at something, right? And Vasquez can play defense quite well, like really well. And I don't think he could hit any worse than Madrigal, really. I mean, not to date anyway. I mean, this is not – there's this thought, I think, among some fans that Nick Madrigal is going to revert back to the 325 hitting – Hitch and Judy second baseman from 2018 or whatever.
It was a while ago. 19.
Yeah, that just doesn't seem like it's realistic at this point. He's had enough at bats in between injuries and benchings to show that he's just not that guy.
I just hope that the PCA going down is because they want him to work on something with the offense. They want to have him spend the time now, this time, to have him work on something to get that. We talked about it last week with Evan Altman, that if he's right around an average hitter, then he's an everyday player that's a
Totally.
a multi-war positive.
He's your
player in
second best
lineup.
player and he's a below average hitter. What does that tell you? You know,
Exactly. So hopefully this is when they're taking the time to try to coach that up and try to give him an opportunity to improve in that area and hopefully be back later in this season. So it was a tough series in Atlanta. But then the Pirates came to town. Pat, we sent you on assignment to see 3 of the 4 Pirates games this weekend. So walk us through how was the Skeens experience?
Oh, yeah, that was great. Yeah, it was a Thursday, Friday, Sunday schedule, so it was all sort of by accident, happenstance. They were all sort of like random, like one-off games. Okay, somebody said I got tickets, you got to go. Well, anyway, I made all the losses, didn't get the win. Watched that on TV listening to the crowd like 2 blocks from my house. But the Skeens game, I think I texted you during the game, didn't I? On that, or
you did, yeah.
Or tweeted out. That was pretty painful. I think at some point we were just kind of sitting there rooting for a lot of full counts, throw a lot of pitches, foul some balls off, just to get them out of the game. Physically, the thought was that if the Cubs could get them out of the game down 2-0 after 6 or so, they had stood a chance against the Pirates bullpen, as we saw in Pittsburgh last week, to actually come back and mount a comeback. And I don't know if this was strangely in my eyes, I don't know if anybody else thought it was strange, the Cubs left Kyle Hendrickson sort of to die in that game. Even though the temperature might have been 74 degrees, it was a hot day in the sun out there. It felt a lot hotter than it was. I can attest to that. And they just left him out there to die. And by the time they pulled him, he had given up. The game was basically over at that point. And I don't know if they were trying to save people for, later games, perhaps. But it was, from 2-0, it became 5-0, it became 8-0, and it's like, well, that's that. And then the Cubs ended up scoring 3 runs, as it turns out, later in the game off the Pirates bullpen. So it's one of those things where everything had to go pretty well for the Cubs in order to win that game against a really good pitcher who was throwing really incredible stuff. It had that kind of Kerry Wood vibe to it. He did have a perfect game for quite a while, and it was scary for us because Cubs have been in a position a couple times now in the last few weeks where it's like, are we going to get no hit? Remember against the Mets? Are we going to get no hit? Are we going to get perfect gamed? I don't want to go to a perfect game where we're the victims, for God's sake. But we knew that his pitch count was high enough. It's like, well, it won't be him alone, at least if we do. That was one of those games where there were not a lot of bright spots.
No.
When you fall that far behind, and again, the Cubs gave up 15 hits, but we only had 4 of our own. 4 hits on Thursday, 2 hits on Sunday. That's as a fan, it's not really enjoyable when you don't have anybody on base. That's
it's boring.
Even the game they won, where they scored 1 run and had 5 hits, 2 of which were in the 9th inning, I might add, but 3 hits up until then. That's not great. Thursday they had 7 hits. I guess that was a high water mark of the week. A big 7-hit explosion on Thursday night.
And Thursday it still felt insurmountable as soon as they were down. Yeah,
and they kept fighting back and getting closer, but getting that it felt like they were going to be 1 run behind the entire game.
Yep.
And they pretty much were. They lost 5-4. So it's not like they got blown out. They lost 2 1-run games. They won a 1-run game. They did get beat pretty badly against a really good pitcher with our worst pitcher going. And I think philosophically, you're like, well, okay, Hendricks is going up against Skeens. That's probably not going to be a win, but certainly the other 3 games have to be winnable, right? Where we've got our best pitchers going, right? We've got Justin Steele going. We've got, Imanaga going. We've got Teon going. Like, we can win those games. And it just wasn't to be. I don't think it's probably too early to be concerned about Justin Steele post-injury, but he's been pretty shaky since he's been back. And I know we talked before the season about a little bit of regression to the mean for him in general. but this is more than that. But I'm just chalking it up to some rust, hopefully, at this point. If he has another couple outings like this, then I think we can be concerned. But it doesn't help when he comes out in that first game and gives up some monster home runs. So
the bright spot of the weekend was, of course, the Saturday victory.
Greatest
shooter
pitcher in Major League history. I mean, that helps.
That's right. The shooter, Shota Imanaga, coming out there.
Through 9 games, the greatest pitcher in Major League Baseball history in his first 9 games. Eat your heart out, Fernando Valenzuela and Steven Strasburg and everybody else.
I am loving all of the pieces comparing this to Fernando Venezuela and the hysteria of the Dodgers at that time.
The team that knocked him out for the first time. Yours truly, Chicago Cubs.
Wow, how about that?
Yeah.
So for Shota, Matt, is this it's got to be must see for you at this point, right? I clear the schedule when he's pitching, and I can't. It's can't miss stuff, and it's unbelievable that it still feels kind of under the. It still feels kind of like a local thing here. It hasn't really caught on yet.
Yeah, I think he's bordering on
Hall
star level.
Yeah.
I think he's a star pitcher right now. It's nerve-wracking to think where they would be without him.
Yeah.
They're 18 and 21 in the non-Imanaga games. He's been great. I think we're witnessing something that could be, this level, not sustainable, but I don't think there's going to be a drop-off like maybe we were curious about, especially citing his fly ball rate. Shoot, I think Saturday the wind was howling. Nothing happened. I get it's the Pirates, but still, we know how that park plays in that type of weather. He's the difference maker. He's the main piece of joy right now. Imanaga himself seems thoughtful, seems very joyful. His teammates embrace him. He's, in terms of him and Gomes or him and Amaya, the game plan is outstanding. And, what he did in Japan is translating here and then some. And it's really encouraging. We're getting to a spot in the season where saying it's early is not correct. I think getting to the 1/3 of the way through the season, obviously we're not late, we're not in the middle, but the early days are starting to fade. And for him to keep doing this is really exciting. The guys behind him have been really good too. But you start to visualize him in a big game, and you really like that. You really like what you see. And what a joy to watch. I'm excited to see him again Friday against the Cardinals. That sells itself.
Yeah. I think at this point you have to realistically start looking at Tom Seaver and his first ballot Hall of Fame vote percentage and think, Imanaga is gonna surpass that. And that's a record that's stood now for decades. Right?
That's good.
So that's where I think we're at with him. And it's a shame because it's almost overshadowed another Hall of Famer, Javier Assad, who isn't probably gonna be a first ballot Hall of Famer. It'll probably be his second year, but still somebody who we're gonna talk about, the way you talk about Maddox and Glavine, down the road. Assad is a guy who sort of outpitched his peripherals last year, and I think people have never really given him the full credit for the numbers he has put up, because it's always been sort of like, well, yeah, but that's going to catch up to you a little bit. And here we are. It's sort of like this happened with Hendricks. Remember when he was a young pitcher too? It's like, well, his peripherals are this or that. And sure enough, Assad's, his FIP or his fielding independent ERA is almost double his actual ERA, I think, just about double. So you're like, well, it's not a 145 ERA. He's really more like a 295 ERA guy. And I'm thinking, okay, so So what are you saying here? Like if all of a sudden the peripherals like are suggesting an ERA under 3, you're talking about a good
Still
pitcher.
awesome.
But you're not talking about a guy with an ERA of 270 who should be at 520 or
Yeah.
something. Like you're talking about a guy who if things broke not well but broke poorly for him is still a good pitcher. So those two guys, and that gets back to your original point, Matt, about the starting pitching. They have been, they've been outstanding. I could never have dreamt at the beginning of the year, even in like some sort of like Cubs fantasy world, that they would be as good as they've been. And if Justin Steele kind of gets back on his game and Taeon's kind of come down to earth a little bit, is luckily all his runs are unearned, but still, he's getting hit around a little bit, and he's evolving back into that number 3 spot that we kind of always got him for, right? But he's a number 3 pitcher on a team that has 3 really potentially good pitchers above him, which technically makes him your number 4. And if those are your top 4 starters, I would take those 4. I would take a well-oiled Justin Steele pitching, as we know he can, and this Imanaga and this Assad and this Taeon, I take that into a playoff, series, and I wouldn't want to be the team we go up against, because we might not be able to hit the ball, but in the playoffs we could win a couple games 1 or 2-0. Again, some pinch hit Patrick Wisdom home run could end up winning you a game, and if you're not giving up any runs, that's what gives me the hope right now, that is as bad as everything else seems to be. If they can just get the other stuff squared away, so far, knock on wood, the pitching is such that I don't look around at any other teams, including the Dodgers, in the National League and say, well, their starting pitching is clearly better than ours, right? You just can't say that. The Braves can't say that about the Braves, can't say that about anybody, which is a testament to just how good the top 2 guys have been, and we'll see where we go. And really, that's been the story of the year. Those guys, plus the Wisniewski, Brown, the young pitchers have actually have succeeded and pitched the way we had hoped they would. Wisniewski last year was a disaster, right? But for Ben Brown to come up this year and be good straight up, and for Wisniewski to come up and go back to the way we thought he was going to be in spring training of last year, as opposed to what we saw in the regular season, that's been a huge plus. The Cubs have some building blocks. Maybe a Cade Horton comes up later, a Jordan Wicks comes back. You've got the pitching seems to be doable. And when Brown goes into the closer role eventually,
hopefully we're rooting for that here on this
I hope
podcast.
so.
Okay.
We're trying to will that into existence.
Yeah. I was explaining that to my wife at the game the other day. I'm like, so I want him to be the closer. And she's like, he doesn't throw a lot of strikes, does he? I'm like, no, he usually does. Like, and he did get out of it without giving up any runs, but it was a little awkward because he wasn't at his top of his game on Sunday, but still got out of it. But no, the pitching is what could carry this team.
Yeah, and even if Ben Brown isn't the closer as a rookie, I think still in a 1-inning segment in the 6th, 7th, or 8th, I think is reasonable.
Yeah.
And I hope he does build up to that point. I think Wisniewski brings a lot of value as a multi-inning guy, but shoot, even him.
You could bring Wisniewski in with 1 out in the 6th and have him pitch the 6th and the 7th.
Exactly. Yeah. Like some kind of specialist like that. I think in a short stint, he could be Brown-esque as well. I really do. And yeah, it just, the bullpen, while the starting pitching has dazzled, the bullpen has been so shaky.
And it hurts. Merriweather got hurt, right? So that
he did.
And
just Alzolay,
hopefully Alzolay is hurt, because I don't know how to explain his performance otherwise unless it's mental. But despite having what you thought were going to be 2 of your top 3 relief pitchers coming into this season, basically useless for you,
right.
And having the guy you acquired in Hector Neris be very shaky. Mm-hmm. When you look around it and you're like, well, Leader's still pitching well, and you got, Wisniewski and Brown and these other, and it's like, oh, okay, well, the Cubs pitching has been injured to the extent, I think they don't have a single pitcher on their 40-man roster who isn't either on the IL or on the major league team at this point. I think
it's one.
Crazy.
There's one left.
One left. Yeah, it's crazy how
hilarious.
How injured the Cubs have been. and yet how much they've still been able to piece things together despite a couple blown saves.
I think that's true, and it's any guy that gets DFA'd from another team, we're like, oh, are the Cubs gonna get him? And they actually did get Tyson Miller. The next guy is Mike Bauman from the Orioles that they're supposedly giving a closer look to. My biggest thing right now is in terms of on the pitching side. I think the Kyle Hendricks question is, the due date, if there's deadlines, the due date's Thursday.
Yeah.
We're going to find out by Thursday truly what's happening with this guy. Originally, I thought it was like 2-3 start pockets, but I think if he's still going to pitch, I think it really is start by start.
Is Jordan Wicks, is he coming back?
He's closer. So Jordan Wicks is throwing a pen tomorrow.
Okay.
And then
so Hendricks basically has one more start, and then maybe
Wicks is going to throw Saturday or Sunday in the minors.
Okay.
And then, maybe 4 or 5 days later, another start, and then that next turn he'd be back.
Okay.
So, yeah, there's still starts available for Hendricks, but I think them releasing the probables today might be a little foreshadowing. I don't know what's going to happen because he already went on the IL. I don't know how much value he has in the bullpen. Do you start him and he comes out immediately after the first 9 hitters?
Right.
I really don't know.
14.7 hits per 9 is a high, right? And 3 homers per 9 is high. So, he is earning his stats honestly. Right. I know people have said in individual starts, well, he things could have gone better for him, but when every ball is put in play.
Yeah, not anymore, I don't think.
I think that's,
And he's come back. He's come back multiple times. There was a spot where we thought he was down. Really last year, we were like, hey, is he coming back? He did, and he was good.
And 2 years ago, remember he got bombed by the Braves on that Sunday night for like 6 home runs or something, and I thought he's through.
That's right. It really has been a couple times, but is this the time where there isn't a turnaround? I'm wondering that more.
And he's
and more.
34 now too. As you get older, and his fastball does not. He's never super fast, but certainly isn't getting any faster.
Mm-hmm.
He's just. It's been challenging, but I am curious about the not being in the probable lineup for Thursday's start. I kind of like your idea actually of pitching the 3 innings and then getting him out of there. He's shown an ability to get through the order once.
Yeah.
Worth. Maybe Wisniewski piggybacks. I don't know, something.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's not like Hendricks is going more than 5 anyway, so you might as well take him out in 3 with no runs or 1 run rather than 5 with having given him 7 runs.
It's just it could be just a strict leash. Like if it's 9 up, 9 down, he still goes to the dugout.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Let's look ahead to the week that will be. You mentioned the probables against Atlanta. So 3 at home against the Braves. Morton and Assad on the Tuesday. Wednesday, Fried and Steele, and then Thursday, TBDs.
Yeah.
So we'll look ahead to the week. We'll make some predictions here. 3 at home against Atlanta, and then on the road for 3 in St. Louis, and then then heading to Milwaukee for 4 on Memorial Day. So. Let's just take the upcoming 6, 3 at home against Atlanta, 3 in St. Louis. The Braves are good. Cardinals are bad. Matt, we'll start with you. Predictions for the upcoming series and the Cardinal series. Of the 6, how many victories for the Cubs this week?
I do think 3-3 would be a good week, I have to say. I guess I see that way. The way that would go would be 1 Braves, 2 Cardinals. That Thursday 1:20 game, the Braves just played 2 games Monday. They just sent Bryce Elder to the minors. So I think you're going to get like an emergency-esque starter against Wisniewski or Brown or whoever. So I think that game is there for the taking, just on paper. Steele's a big question mark this week. How does he do after a couple rough outings? Assad a second time against the Braves within a week span is asking a lot. But I'm not going to count him out. I'm not, for sure. But
you got a Shota game in St. Louis.
You'd like to lead off the series. Well, if Imanaga does take that first game, I don't see why he wouldn't. I see a path to 3-3. I really want to say 4-2. But I'm thinking 3-3.
Pat?
Yeah, I see the Cubs similar to Matt. I see them taking 1 of 3 from the Braves, winning a couple games against St. Louis. I actually foresee the Cubs being 3-2 headed into that last game, and fans excited about a sweep, only to have Sonny Gray pitch fairly well and shut us down. I happen to have more respect for Gray than some people do, but I think he's a good pitcher.
Yeah, he's been great.
Guy who I kind of wanted the Cubs to get this offseason, but they did not. They re-signed Hendricks instead, which was their choice.
I saw him pitch in St. Louis against the Braves, and
who knows who's right or wrong? Maybe I was wrong to think we should get Gray instead of Hendricks. Maybe signing Hendricks was the right move. Time will tell, but I think so far I'm winning that one. I think 3-3 would be a 3-3 would be the kind of week where you tread water at a time when you need to tread water, and hopefully guys will start getting healthy, and maybe be nice to get some sign of life or proof of life from our offense, and get a couple hits and score some runs and get back to a good position. Because unfortunately, as you pointed out earlier, the Cubs follow this up with, I think, 7 straight games against other foes from the NL Central in Milwaukee and Cincinnati. So those are games, you're going to want to do well in. And they gotta, after this kind of disappointing 2-4 week, it would be disappointing again to go 2-4 again. I think that would start to make you nervous and think that maybe, things are going off the tracks here. But I have faith in Craig Counsell that he will right the ship here. 3-3.
I think you guys nailed it. Yeah, no, I agree. Let's make it unanimous. That's 3-3 for all the reasons you stated, and hopefully,
no need to watch the games.
No, just ship it just last
listen
week.
To the post game with Matt. That's all.
That's right. I think that treading water is what you want to see, because it's all about the 4 games in Milwaukee. As after that 4-game series that starts on Memorial Day, the 4 games against Milwaukee, you play Milwaukee 6 times again after that series, and that's it. So that is a very important series, because you're just not going to have many shots at the team in front of you the rest of the way. So you got 4 to close out May, and then 6 games remaining for the rest of the season. And
Memorial Day is usually the first time where you do like a real standings check.
Yep.
So is that the series where, the more of our concrete curiosities about this team take shape? Because we don't actually know if this team is good. There's been too many absences, too many odd things happening.
Yeah.
So maybe that 4 days, it's like, all right, let's go.
And that's a team playing without, Brandon Woodruff, Corbin Burns, or two
keep winning.
Cy Young type pitchers. Devin Williams, who was the best closer in baseball last year. I mean, and they've been able to hold it together.
Right.
So maybe they're due for a little bit of a comeback to earth. And who better to give it to them than us?
Yes.
Well, it's that time. We're going to change gears a little bit here. It's one of my favorite times on this show. This season is the 40th anniversary of the Cubs' 1984 playoff team. And so every week on this podcast, we parachute into 1984. We take a look around. We see what's going on. We juxtapose that team with what this team is doing, and see what was going on as the Cubs tried to make the playoffs in 1984. Pat, what happened this week?
This was a good week for the 1984 Cubs. They went 5-1.
Wow.
Yeah. Wouldn't that be nice? They won 2 out of 3 at Cincinnati, and they came home and they swept the Houston Astros with a walk-off walk. We did a lot of walk-off walks back in the 80s. Another one, we've been talking about this all year, and yet another walk-off walk. This time Gary Woods walked in Leon Durham in the 9th inning, give the Cubs one of the wins against Houston, against future Cub relief pitcher Dave Smith. I don't know if you remember Dave Smith. He was with the Cubs, I think, for 1 year. He sucked. But he was a pretty good relief pitcher for the Astros before. I remember him most as a child in the late 80s, early 90s maybe, because I remember watching him smoke cigarettes in the bullpen, which, by the way, was just down the left field line, so you couldn't miss it. There was no wall. He just sat there and smoked cigarettes on the field, basically. And then he got smoked whenever he came into games, at least his Cub season. But he was doing pretty well with the Astros, except for the time when the Cubs got the walk-off walk. And so that 5-1 week catapulted the Cubs into first place in the NL East at the time, the 6-team NL East. And that was significant because this was a Cubs team that had not finished over 500 in a dozen years. And apart from the miraculous, glorious 1977 Cubs that were actually in first place in May, before having a June swoon of epic proportion, the Cubs hadn't really had this kind of success this late in the year in quite some time. So being in first place was a big deal. It was something that almost nobody predicted, but somebody did predict it. And I remember that. And I have a resource here, an original source. This is do you remember a guy by the name of Bill James?
Of course.
He's still on Twitter. But back in the 80s, he came out starting in 1984, I think, with this thing called the Bill James Baseball Abstract, right?
Wow, look at that.
And when I was a kid, I got these things. I have 84, 85, 86, 87, and 88. And what he was famous for at the time was it was the very cutting edge beginning of the sabermetrics movement. He kind of looked at things differently. He looked at stats differently. He started counting things like walks as opposed to just hits. In terms of analyzing the value of players, he came up with his own sort of like runs created calculus formula that included on base percentage and slugging percentage. Well, he didn't call it that, but basically total bases and then he would also divide it by plate appearances to show like how much value players. It was like an early WAR almost offensively, right? How much value players were performing at. So he had these books that he would come out with, and he would go through whatever new stats he was coming up with at the time, playing around with stuff. And then he would do his analysis of the teams team by team. So imagine my surprise as a young child when I got to the Chicago Cubs page, the 5th place Chicago Cubs from the year before, which was an upgrade from 6th place the year before that, et cetera, et cetera. And he says, I'll read you the Cubs section, the first sentence. If anybody offers you 100 odds against the Chicago Cubs winning the National League East in 1984, take them up on it. And then he goes on to say, if I've ever seen a dead giveaway set up for a miracle, this is it. And he predicted the Cubs would win the division. He said it wasn't a sure thing, but he said the odds should be like 6-1, which was ridiculous. 6-1. I mean, we're a 90-loss team. Why would we have such good odds to win? And he walked through factors that people back in 40 years ago didn't take into account. Like he's like, well, the last year in 83, the Cubs run differential was really not that bad. He said it certainly wasn't 19 games under 500 bad. And then he kind of walked through bringing, I guess there's a certain syndrome or factor at the time where if you had a high intensity manager like Lee Elia, who the Cubs had the year before, and you replace him with Jim Fry, who's kind of laid back and calm, that actually kind of had, it's sort of like in hockey, the Mike Keenan effect, and then you get the guy afterwards who's kind of the
players
guy.
Coach,
and players play for that, right? So he looked at that. He looked at how the Cubs had the worst record on artificial turf the year before at 13-35. And it turns out, of course, the Cubs, spoiler alert, were 30-18 in those games in 1984. And he looked at the defensive players and things they could do and how their manager, they had a manager Jim Fry, who had managed the Royals before and how he was used to AstroTurf and kind of knew how to, negotiate the lineup in a way that would play to those strengths, et cetera. And just kind of went through over and over again, how the Cubs had upgraded their pitching, how they did this, how they young players like Mel Hall and another young outfielder he was really high on, a guy by the name of Joe Carter, who he thought could be an outstanding Major League Baseball player. Go figure. Maybe even get 100 RBIs 10 years in a row, but that's for another day. Anyway, he went on and on to talk about how the Cubs were this sort of in the weeds surprise team that was going to actually shock the world and win the division. Something the Cubs had never done, by the way, won a division, because the last time they went to the playoffs, they didn't have divisions. They had the National League and American League because it was the year 1945.
Jeez.
So it was, to say that the Cubs would make the playoffs when they hadn't in 39 years was kind of a bold statement.
You're on a limb. Yeah.
Yeah, he went out on a limb.
Yeah.
And sure enough, Cubs were in first place on This Week in 1984. So it seemed as if a lot of what Bill James was saying was coming to fruition. And I guess we'll just find out next week how that journey proceeded. If
you want to see the document that Pat was displaying, you can see it at our YouTube channel. Make sure you're over at youtube.com.
By the way, $6.95. That was an expensive book back then, in 1984.
Definitely was. Make sure you go to youtube.com, search for Wrigleyville Nation Podcast. Give us a subscribe over there. Helps us work the algorithm so other Cub fans can find the show. So make sure you're supporting us there. And you can see the cool, fun 84 artifacts that Pat pulls up here every week as we do this. What was it last week? We had a program from 84 last
year was the media guide.
It was the media guide, yeah.
The week before was the program, the program they came out with periodically throughout the season.
So all kinds of fun stuff and goodies. So make sure you're watching the video version of this podcast over on YouTube.
And we're going to have a couple, I don't want to, spoiler alert, I haven't mentioned to you yet, Jeremy, but I'm lining up some player interviews too from 84 Cub players that are still with us.
Very excited for that. The time we interviewed Bob Denier is one of my favorite podcasts we did here. So definitely looking forward to being able to talk to some of those players as well. Always a great time parachuting into 1984 and checking in on what was going on there. Matt, it's been great getting to catch up with you as well. Any final thoughts before we wrap it up and call it a podcast?
Yeah, hoping for 3-3 this week. Want to see the offense turn it around. Really interested to see what Craig Counsell does this week and beyond, how he approaches some of these situations, whether they're delicate or not, especially the Hendricks situation. And it was great to be on with you guys. I think it was a good time, and I would like to do it again.
And we definitely look forward to having you back on the podcast. For those of you who want to hear more from you, please let our listeners know where they can find your work on the internet.
Yeah, Locked On Cubs, YouTube, Apple, Spotify, everywhere you get your podcasts. Sam Olber and I do a 25 to 30-minute episode each weekday, and most of the weeknight games were live on YouTube about 10 minutes after the final out, and then soon after pushed out to all the platforms. So, we're humming along over there. We're definitely proud of what we're doing, and we're going to try to keep it going.
Excellent, and glad to have you on. It's been a great time. It's been a great show, and hopefully it'll be a great week ahead for the Cubs. And with that, we're going to wrap it up and call it a podcast. So, Pat, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thanks again, everyone, for listening. We'll talk to you again next time.